ceremonial burials. Apparently these people were revered in their society. But the article claims that the brain volume is almost twice what ours would be, and thus the average person in their society would have an IQ of 150, and some of them could have an IQ that goes up to 300. These weird elongated skulls were also found in a dig in Siberia in a town called Omsk, and the men who dug them up were so afraid that many of them actually started crying and left their jobs and refused to come back. We furthermore see in the case of the Mongolian conquerors that there were reports of them having weird elongated skulls. And most recently, even in Europe, we have found tombs of the nobility, the wealthy people who preserve their bloodlines, such as in France. And they also have this bizarre elongated skull feature. It wasn't until insiders started talking to me that I thought about the fact that in the Vatican, you see people wearing these mitre hats, and those hats would very nicely conceal an elongated skull. These people with elongated skulls would look like us in their faces, and the hat would conceal the only thing that would make them appear to be different. My research also turned up data on an Italian noble family from the 14th century known as the d'Este clan. And the d'Este clan had very close ties to the Vatican. What's so bizarre is when you look at a painting of Prince Leonello d'Este and someone who is either his sister or his wife, the scholars don't really know, they usually call her Princess d'Este. They both have freakishly elongated skulls in this painting. The story gets even more interesting when you trace the descendants of the d'Este clan, the lineage that they left behind. For what you find is that King George I, who began ruling in 1714, was a direct bloodline descendant of these people who obviously had the elongated skulls in the 1400s. And then you find out that a variety of earlier British consorts, meaning nobility, also were direct descendants of the d'Este clan. Then it gets even more outrageous when you discover that the royal families of Norway, Sweden, Spain, and Denmark are all descendants of the same elongated skull d'Este clan. And let's not forget that only recently we found royal tombs in France and other countries in Europe in which the nobility again had these elongated skulls. And if you think this only has to do with divine right of kings and European nobility, you would be wrong. In 1988, an article in the New York Times traced fully 13 out of all of the 40 U.S. presidents at the time as having a direct bloodline connection to European nobility. In 2012, a 12-year-old girl named Brigitte d'Avignon actually did a much more complex genealogical study of the U.S. presidents using the power of the internet and computers.
On the School Watch tonight, the story of a 7th grader from Salinas who claims to have made a major discovery about President Obama. She and her grandfather say that President Obama is related to all but one U.S. president.
And she found that 42 out of 43 U.S. presidents all had a common ancestor in King John I from England. And this is not just any old king. This is the guy who actually chartered the Magna Carta, which became the defining element that turned into the British Constitution.
D'Avignon says she spent countless hours on the internet over the summer researching the lineage of our presidents, a project that started with her trying to trace her own family tree.
But I'm the first historian to do all the presidents.
So that's almost all of the U.S. presidents that we've ever had. The bottom line is these people are tracking their lineage, they're tracking their bloodline, and they're making sure that their own people get steered into the positions of the highest power and influence worldwide, including the United States of America.
Within secret societies, there can be both good and bad people, white hats and black hats. So many of these secret societies are, of course, involved in very dark practices. But there are also secret societies out there that are harboring knowledge and information and technology to keep it out of the hands of the deep state or the black hats or the people that would do detriment with these technologies.
Some of the, I guess, very well-known elites names I won't mention, but are on the front lobes of most watching this video, are highly involved not only in some of the slave trade aspects, but are also involved in dealing with non-terrestrials and dealing with organized crime down here on Earth and how it's related to these programs.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time. Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. For the record, my name is Mike Ruppert, R-U-P-P-E-R-T. I did bring this information out 18 years ago, and I got shot at and forced out of LAPD because of it. I've been on the record for 18 years nonstop, and I'll be happy to give you, Congressman, anything that I have.
A lot of these elite are running a lot of financial scams, drug programs to raise money for these secret programs that they have going on. And they take full advantage of this access.
They probably don't age anymore. You know, a 1%er, you don't know who they are. You don't even know what they look like. You don't even know their name. They could go down and be at a 7-Eleven, you wouldn't even know it. So they could not age and you wouldn't know it. Never get sick. Offsprings would be born. They'd be super smart, super strong. Just quality of life improved in every direction. And I'm sure the 1%ers are enjoying it, while the rest of us are dying with diseases and malformities and stuff. They're walking around, you know, body beautiful. So that's just the medical area. Then think about the other things. Transportation, the vehicles they travel around, home, security, all that stuff. Just, you know, it'd be like somebody in modern suburbia looking at a man in a cave. We're the men in the cave.
What very often occurs is that an elite will get to a very old, ripe age, or they will die in some sort of an accident publicly. Privately, they are taken, and depending on their level, they are either age regressed or they have their consciousness basically downloaded into a clone that is an exact duplicate of them. They then disappear from the public eye forever and go into these programs or go into retirement. This is something that pops up a lot in the programs, and everyone that has served deeply knows that the elite have access, and many of them never really die.
What the deep state or the cabal or the New World Order is a small group of very powerful but very psychopathic individuals that have acquired a lot of money, a lot of technology, and a lot of information over the course of centuries.
Definitely your politicians. The older ones. The one that are chair people that command the power. 1%ers. Chairman of the boards. Those people. That's they. That's ones we never know their names, don't know their faces, and they control all the power.
The more you get involved in these societies, the deeper and deeper you go, the more compromised you become. You start to learn more and more of the secret teachings. You have to work really hard for the knowledge. It can take years of time. You keep accessing higher and higher levels of rank, and they keep dropping these little seeds in as you go on. Seeds that start to blossom in your mind and make you think differently. Ultimately, if you go far enough down this road, you will be invited to participate in things like pedophilia and human sacrifice. And if you don't do it, it's the offer you can't refuse. They may actually even kill you. Once you partake in these activities, whether you like them or not, they now have leverage they can use against you. If you ever dare to speak out against this group, they have photographs, they have films, They have the footage that can absolutely ruin your life.
Deze mensen, de meeste daarvan, hadden een Luciferiaans geloof. En dan kan iedereen zeggen, ja, geloof bestaat niet en God bestaat niet, alles bestaat niet. Nou, voor die mensen was het de waarheid en de werkelijkheid. Hun diende dus iets onstoffelijks. Hun diende wat zij noemden Lucifer. En ik kwam dus ook in die kringen. Alleen ik lachte erom, want het waren voor mij gewoon klanten. Dus ik kwam in wat ze noemden Satanskerken.
Ik wou zeggen, we hebben het nu over het satanisme.
Ja,
Oké.
ik kwam dus in Satanskerken, maar ik kwam zeg maar op route even langs, even buurten. En daar was dan op dat moment een heilige mis, hun heilige soorten mis. En dat was met blote vrouwen en wat drank en dit en dat. En ik vond het alleen maar leuk. Ik hechtte weinig of geen geloof aan hun geloof. Of ik was er eigenlijk niet eens van overtuigd dat het überhaupt allemaal wel bestond.
Het was meer een schouwspel voor jou.
Ja, ik zag gewoon de donkerte en de slechtheid en de diepte daarvan zit in de mens zelf.
Ja.
Ik koppelde het nog niet zo. Maar ook die kringen verkeerde ik dus in, omdat ja, als gast zeg maar, omdat ik vond het allemaal wel leuk. En al die blote vrouwen en al die dingetjes die daar speelden. Het was het vrije leven. Maar er kwam een moment, toen werd ik dus uitgenodigd, daarom vertel ik dit ook, om mee te gaan doen aan offers in het buitenland. Dat was het breekpunt. Kinderen.
Oké. Dat werd je gevraagd.
Ja, ik kon het niet.
The reason that these elite dark occult societies sacrifice and traffic children, first and foremost, is the energy associated with it. So when a human is in the state of fear and trauma, they release a energy. And this energy can be picked up by essentially negative extraterrestrial beings, negative archonic influences, and they feed off of it. They literally feed off the energetic release of fear and trauma. When these dark groups use children, because a child is not mentally programmed yet as an adult is, they are much more innocent, they're much more connected into their higher selves or into their divine, if you will. The trauma that they release is much more potent than using adults. During these ritualistic practices that the elite participate in, one of the compounds that is released in the children's body during torture, during trauma, is a compound called adrenochrome. It's released out of the adrenal gland during highly traumatized incidents, and this adrenochrome acts as essentially a drug. These secret societies that make up the deep state are nothing new. This actually spans back thousands and thousands of years, and they have always occulted this information for themselves. We need to understand what occulted actually means. Occulted just simply means hidden in Latin. It doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, it just means hidden. So these secret society groups have hidden or occulted this information for thousands and thousands of years. They've kept it to themselves, and they haven't shared it with anybody outside of their inner circles.
The secret societies are really more of a front organization that they use to recruit people, and they will gradually over time find out exactly how ruthless and bloodthirsty you are. It is only as you go farther and farther into this, you become embedded with your brothers in a brotherhood, you become more and more involved, you get deeper and deeper in, that then they start hitting you with the really heavy stuff. Until we face as a society that these things are actually happening and that there is a centralized control group that is responsible for this, we will be doomed for these people to continue to exert their control over us. If we don't learn how to respect each other, then we're never going to make any progress. We need to learn from the Me Too movement and understand that there is corruption, there is rape, there is pedophilia, there is child trafficking, there is human sacrifice, there is cannibalism. And all of these things are happening because there is a hidden elite that actually uses these behaviors as part of their religious sacrament. It actually doesn't matter whether you believe that these people exist or not. The bottom line is that they are actually advertising themselves constantly. They do it in movies. There's a whole set of symbols that you can look for in movies that show their influence. They do it in video games. They do it in television shows. They do it in music videos like crazy. They do it in awards ceremonies. And it's always in your face. Now is the time for us to get our heads out of the sand and understand that even if these things do seem unthinkable to us, there are people today who are actively practicing this. The evidence is voluminous, and really what it boils down to is that people don't want to look at the evidence because it is so upsetting.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Solar Warden went active 1980, 1981. It was funded in large part by SDI through President Reagan, though that money was funneled off in many different programs. Solar Warden was developed to do exactly what its namesake says, to police our solar system. We had the technology to prevent these interloper ET races from coming into our solar system, grabbing our people and leaving. We could now stop them. So Solar Warden was developed and began to do its job of policing the solar system. At the same time, we had the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, which was made up of all of these military-industrial complex corporations. We have all of these other programs that are developing technology at the same time and are developing much, much more advanced technologies. So advanced, in fact, that there are ET races that come here to trade for our technology.
Corey Good is the one insider I found whose testimony ties all of these different threads together. I've heard Corey have knowledge of something that each of the different other insiders I've spoken to had said to me in the past. Nobody else had ever done that before, and that was fascinating because I had not put this information online. The information was proprietary. It was things that I'd heard over the course of conversations that could have gone on for many, many dozens of hours over time, spreading across about 20 years worth of my own past history.
I think they chose children for these MyLab programs in several different ways. They had to profile them. They definitely used standardized testing and a few other ways to identify whether they had a skill or a talent that they needed. Then they would check out their family life. They preferred children from broken homes or from homes that were not harmonious because the children are used to getting smacked around, they're used to stressful environments, and the parents were not always as attentive as other parents. Therefore, the children were able to handle a lot more stress, and the parents may not notice, certain behavior in the kids. Well, I guess you would say a typical day, if there is a typical day in the life of a MyLab, would be your parents dropping you off at school, just like any other day, and except that day, you're pulled aside and told you're going to go on a field trip. You're in a special education class or an accelerated learning class. You're special. You're being taken off campus to go, look at dinosaurs. Well, you are taken, put in a van, Usually a person is driving that is military looking, sometimes in uniform. They would then drive us for a little over an hour to Carswell Air Force Base. We parked inside this hangar that was a motor pool, and we walked to the back, and there was an elevator. And the elevator went down quite a ways. And when we came out, we were underground in a Cold War era type bunker. That would then lead us to another set of elevators that would take us down where we would get on underground trams that would, there were trains that would take us over 500 miles per hour anywhere in the world. When we were sent to one of these locations through one of these shuttles, we would then go through, sometimes because of travel time, we would only get 45 minutes of training in, sometimes 2-3 hours of training in. Then we would go back, be debriefed, and they would give us a chemical through a shot, and they would sit us in a chair in front of a movie screen and basically hypnotize us and give us a screen memory of going to a museum and looking at dinosaurs. They would then put us in the same van, drive us back to school, let us out, and as our parents picked us up, we would tell them all about looking at dinosaurs.
MKUltra was a program done by the CIA in the 1950s and 60s, and within MKUltra, they experimented with trauma-based mind control through the use of electroshock therapy, through the use of mind-altering drugs, through the use of even hypnotic regression and many other techniques to figure out how to control and program human beings.
There was programming at bases. They use military bases because they won't have any interference when they have someone on a military base. And a lot of my programming took place on military bases. I would like to talk about the fact that there are rituals done at the military bases also, and that rituals are not a cover. The people that do the mind control are involved, and rituals are very much a part of how they do things. For example, naval intelligence members or people that are in naval intelligence are usually very involved with Ordo Templi Orientis. And that doesn't mean that everyone in naval intelligence is involved in that. But naval intelligence is responsible for a lot of overseeing of ritual activity in this country. And they are responsible for a lot of this going on. There are other organizations, other agencies involved, but naval intelligence is very involved.
We were taken to some kind of facility out on the Nevada desert, and for a long time I thought it was Area 51. But there was also another underground facility at Tonopah, so either Area 51 or the Tonopah facility was taken to a medical dispensary type of place, and was sat down in a waiting room with the lights off. Everything they did seemed to be to cover memory, to make sure that if anybody did remember anything, being in a room with the lights off, you wouldn't be able to see the people clearly, things like that. I was given fatigues to wear that night, with no rank insignia, no name tags, no identifying marks of any kind. Was forbidden to speak to the other people that I was out there with, beyond what was necessary to run the test. So the situation they put us in was very isolating and very frightening, terrifying actually. And so we got to this facility, we sat down in this waiting room with the lights off, and I still see it really clearly. I could draw a picture. And one by one we had to go off to the side in this little room. Finally they called my name and I went into the little room, and it was a small room. There was a security guard in there in desert camo fatigues, wearing a sidearm. He was standing at parade rest. And And I was told to lay down on this stainless steel examining table that looked old, like it was maybe from the 40s or 50s. And I laid down on there fully clothed. I didn't have to take anything off. And I waited for a long time with that security guard watching me. And finally some guy in a white lab coat came in, the same door I had gone in to the room in. And he said, "Stay calm," 3 times in this really deadpan, monotone voice. And he walked past the security guard, up the right side of the table, got up to the right side of my head, and then he had a hypodermic needle hidden in the sleeve of his lab coat, and he injected me in the side of the neck right here. And whatever the chemical was went straight to my brain. And so I'm kind of in shock from whatever this injection's doing to me, because it went straight to the brain, and I was like, you know, in shock. Suddenly there's 2 guys on either side of that table pulling me up by the arms and dragging me off the table and down through this doorway where there was a long flight of stairs going down. And for some reason I remember it as one long flight going down, not switchbacks like a lot of store cases are. It was just straight down. They half carried me, half dragged me down those stairs. And at the bottom of the stairs there was like this little room that had a one-way mirror in it. And I went through the effects of that injection in that room. And I felt like, I've described it so many ways down through the years. It was kind of like feeling like your body's turning to soda pop fizz or beer foam. It's just like, you know, when your leg goes to sleep and it comes back and there's all the pins and needles and tingling and everything else like that. It was like that was happening to my whole body. But super duper intense pins and needles. And I just curled up on the floor and just screamed because it was just doing this number on me, you know. And I felt like I was coming apart somehow. I don't know why or how I thought that, but that's how my body felt. It felt like it was just going to come apart and run down a drain in the floor. And I had a feeling that because that mirrored thing on the wall, I think it was a one-way mirror, and they were looking at me through the mirror to watch me go through the effects of this. And I've racked my brain to try to come up with some idea of what this injection was and what it was for. And the only thing I've been able to come up with is maybe they were trying to create a chemical version of ascension.
One of the technologies that I was exposed to while in the MyLab programs were the chemical cocktails they would use on us. They would use them to enhance us in many different ways. Some of the ways that we would be enhanced would be if they discovered we had an intuitive empath ability. There was a cocktail that they would give us that would enhance it, make it many-fold stronger. They would also give cocktails to people that would have hormones in them that would make them stronger, faster, and think quicker. A major part of the program was that when you started, they were not quite sure where they would send you. A lot of the kids that were in these programs, they would end up in different syndicates here on the Earth working for the Cabal, and a small percentage, very small, when you end up going into the secret space program.
Certain children were picked who had certain DNA, and I was connected with that. And what they did was, when we were like 5 and 6 years old, they took us there, and they trained us, and we did. We learned and we trained and we did all sorts of operations when we were there. Now, when I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Los Angeles at the time, out of the blue, and I was living on Sepulveda Boulevard, and the Mars jump rooms for children were on at 999 Sepulveda Boulevard. I now know. So and I didn't know. So I had these memories before I knew that this particular information about these Mars jump rooms on Harvard Boulevard. It was a lot of training. So say from 5 years old to 25 years old was spent there, and I know some of the people now who are back here. But what they did then at the end of the Mars, at the end of that thing, is they used age regression technology, brought us back to 5 years old, and then placed us exactly back to where we were.
The reason so few went into the secret space program was that most of the participants, almost all of the participants, are pulled from various military branches. They bring people in to the military, send them through training, testing, find out where their skills lean, and if they have the fortitude for this type of mission, and then they're invited in or drafted in, and they'll serve a 20-year term. And this is referred to as a 20 and back. And after that 20 years, they are actually age regressed and regressed back in time using the technology that was handed to us by non-terrestrials. And then they were buttoned up in time and placed back in their life. And then they finish out the rest of their military term and then return to civilian life, having no memory of serving in the secret space program. The whole point of regressing people back in time after serving in the 20 and back and wiping their memory has to do with a deal that was made with an extraterrestrial group that gave us that technology. There's a Nordic group that are engaged in a time and space battle with a reptilian group. This battle's gone on for many thousands of years.
When delving into this research, some people formulate ideas that there's only good extraterrestrials here or there's only bad extraterrestrials here. But we need to understand that the law of polarity is universal. There's both good or benevolent extraterrestrials here to help us, and there's negative extraterrestrials here to essentially feed off of us and traumatize us into a state of fear. These negative extraterrestrial species involve some gray species. They also involve many reptilian species and many non-physical archonic entities that can also remotely influence and utilize much of that fear energy and traumatized energy that we release.
Towards the end of my training, it started to become pretty clear that I had done very well in the intuitive empath training. I had done very well in the rest of the general training that I was given. And I was starting to be introduced to non-terrestrial beings. So it became very obvious that I was going to be interacting with non-terrestrials, and I assumed it was going to be in an off-world environment. Little did I know that I was going to be drafted in this program when I was 16 years old. And it was during my Christmas break, between the age of 16 and 17 years old. I turned 17 in February. I was taken from my room. I was then taken to Carswell Air Force Base. I was then transported to the moon, where I sat and signed a bunch of papers that were non-disclosures, were just a big stack of papers signing my life away when I wasn't even 17 years old. The Lunar Operations Command is a moon base, and it was built out originally by the Germans in the late 1930s, early 1940s. While they were building this complex, they had utilized an ancient alien building that was not too terribly far away. They had found a bunch of these buildings on the moon, and they had found one of the buildings that they were able to patch up with some of the concrete they made from the local regolith. They then were able to pressurize it and use it as a base of operations while they built out the Lunar Operation Command. After a number of years, and after Operation Paperclip, it served its purpose and integrated the Nazis into the military-industrial complex. The LOC was handed over to the Americans. When approaching the moon from Earth in an electrogravitic craft, you will find the moon will be at a distance, and then it will grow very quickly in front of you. And then the next thing you know, you are above the surface. You will then fly in the electrogravitic craft at breakneck speeds, except you don't feel inertia. You find yourself hugging maybe 90 feet, 300 feet above the lunar surface, going at incredible speeds until you reach a crater. And then you find yourself orbiting a crater. The person piloting the craft radios in, requesting permission to land. You don't see anywhere to land. All of a sudden, a little haze kind of occurs, and then there's a base. It's the Lunar Operation Command. And as you fly down and over, there is a control tower where they control the air traffic. As you fly around this base to make your final approach, you see a secondary crater. And as you fly down into that crater, it's fairly deep, and you end up popping out into a lava tube section where you immediately see a giant building built into the middle of that lava tube that blocks it. And it's built kind of like the shape of a bell. And it looks like the outside of a battleship almost, the way it's built. You then fly in and land in the bay, and you're now at the Lunar Operation Command.
Well, some of the testimony that's come to me over the last year in particular has been nothing short of startling in terms of the degree to which the space program, the secret space program, has expanded. I've talked to people who have said that there is and has been an ongoing extrasolar planetary colonization program that's been going on for decades and decades. I mean, to the point where one of the people who had actually gone, and this was a claim that he made, that he was on a warp-capable spacecraft that went from here to the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy in 20 minutes, and that when they got there, they located at least 8 Earth-like planets in some of the star systems along the edge of the galaxy, and 8 of those planets had human life on them. They were Earth-sized planets with sun-like stars similar to our sun, at approximately the same distances. They wound up using some kind of radio telemetry sensors to determine which ones were broadcasting in conventional radio and television signals. They found 2 planets like that, 2 of which were speaking English. And the minute I heard this, I thought, well, this is complete baloney, or this system, this whole program has been going on for a lot longer than anybody would have dreamed. But he described seeing cities and roads and cars and people and conventional clothing speaking English. And there's only one way that that's possible, I mean, other than parallel universe type of scenario, and that is that the program's been going on for much, much longer.
Right after about the 6-year mark in my 20 and back experience, I found out some very disturbing details that no one on the ship knew about. And, well, almost none. I was approached by a petty officer Wheeler, someone who I honestly had a crush on, and she used that to her advantage. She needed me and an engineer to help her get into a room, a restricted room, and look into some pods. She wanted to know what was in those pods. She had a bad feeling. Well, we helped her get in, and I was standing watch. She and the engineer opened up one of the pods, and they were cryogenic chambers, and they were full of people that had basically looked like they'd been filleted and cleaned and sent to the market. While I saw this a little bit from a distance, some gas was escaping from this pod, and it overcame the petty officer and the engineer, and they collapsed. And as I was turning to run through the door I was watching through, I collapsed. After I came to in the sick bay, they had explained that the 2 others had died in the accident and that I was being held for debriefing. I was then debriefed, told not to repeat the information to anyone else. If I wasn't a valuable, intuitive empath, my fate would have been much different. So they sent me back to my regular duties and told me that from time to time I was going to be pulled over to work on a different deck on a different project. And this project was basically a galactic slave trade. It turned out that for many decades, while we were developing technology to try to fight some of the negative ETs, there were extraterrestrials that were coming into our solar system, were coming to our planet, would swoop down and kidnap people and leave, and then take them and trade them off into some sort of galactic slave trade that's going on. After a while, the benevolent powers that be decided, you know what, this is a commodity. If we start calling our own people and trading them off to these extraterrestrials, we can get trinkets, we can get technology, we can get biologicals, and that's what happened. They would trade human beings for biological samples, much like what Emery Smith would end up receiving in his lab and doing different experiments on. And they would also get technology, and they would trade the humans off. The humans would go off to be used in any number of ways. Humans are very coveted. People aren't only leaving to be food for reptilians. That's a small percentage. Most of them are being used for their skills. Humans are very well known for our engineering, our creativity, our ability to bring things from our mind and create them and engineer them. And strangely enough, we're coveted and used in that fashion. So the Cabal group has been basically utilizing human beings as a resource. So as little groups of people from all of these different programs started to join and work very quietly and secretly to not only find out the full truth of what was going on, but find a way to combat it. The SSP Alliance is a very small fraction of the overall secret space program or secret space programs, under 1%. So the only technology that they have is what they brought with them when they defected. It is a ragtag group that is doing their best to bring full disclosure to humanity. They don't want a slow, protracted disclosure. They want all of these technologies given to all of humanity at once, not to any one group, any one country, to everyone at once. And that is what the Secret Space Program Alliance has been working for.
The collective story that these insiders have shared with me is much bigger than where the UFO community had been going up until then, and thus it has utterly revolutionized the whole basic discussion of what everyone is now talking about. Whether they agree with it or not, everyone has had to deal with the concept of the secret space program.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
On September 10th, 2001, the day before 9/11, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld testified in front of congressmen about $2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon. In 2015, an Inspector General report came out detailing that number grew from $2.3 trillion to $6.5 trillion missing from the Pentagon. This money is going into unacknowledged projects both above our heads and below ground, into deep underground military bases and secret space programs with technology far beyond what many of us can even realize.
Our black budget, for instance, garners $1.023 trillion every 2 years. It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide. Each one has an average cost of $17 to $19 billion. Each one is built in the site, it used to be, it'd take a year to 2 years to build each one. And now they're capable of building a couple of them a year with sophisticated methods. Area 51 is only one base, one of the 131 bases. Of these 131 bases, I call Area 51 a mega base. It's got more than one base in it. It's Tonopah Test Range, Area 51, S2, S4, Groom Lake, and a host of others. Now, these mega bases are gobbling up our gross national product. Right now, we're spending 28% of the gross national product on building underground bases solely.
China has built 50 different ghost cities that collectively are built to hold an estimated 64 million inhabitants. The apartment buildings, the roads, all of the infrastructure, all the plumbing, all the electrical, everything you need for a city, and there's nobody there. 50 cities, 64 million people. Now remember, China's gross domestic product is $11.2 trillion. They're not even spending a majority of their gross domestic product on these ghost cities, and yet they have the money to do it. It's only cost them a few $1 trillion. So once you start thinking about it that way, you start to see how much money $1,000 billion really is. $1 billion is a lot. If you're a billionaire, you can do anything you want. $1,000 billion is a sum of money that just gets dropped out there with this word trillion, but we're not really thinking about how it literally can build an entire civilization. The articles on China's ghost cities refer to it as China's multi-billion-dollar debt, not a debt in the trillions. In fact, in 2016, one estimate that I saw showed that the total estimated debt that China has gone into to build these ghost cities is only $2.5 trillion. Now that's 50 different cities that hold 64 million people, just because they think that as they continue to have a population boom, that they need to have a place where these people can eventually go. But literally nobody is there right now. So imagine what that means when you start tossing around a figure of the too big to fail banks needing a bailout that, according to Senator Ron Paul, was $29 trillion. You're talking about over 10 times the amount of money that China needed to build 50 different ghost cities that can hold millions and millions and millions of people. So then the question is, where did all this money go? The total amount of money in the world in the 2008 year of the collapse, the gross world product, or GWP, was only $60 trillion. So the theft of $29 trillion from the printed out of hot air US dollar is half of the wealth of the entire world. Try to wrap your head around this, because what I'm telling you is, from all the insiders I've been speaking to for the last 20 years, they are building civilizations. It's just not above ground where we see it on the surface of the planet. There is vast amounts of underground drilling. There are huge caverns, 20, 30 miles wide, that they've built out into gorgeous, elaborate cities, and they're building entire civilizations on planets and moons in our solar system. This is where the money is going.
Well, I have a copy of the Inspector General Act here in front of me, and it says, among other things, that it's your responsibility to conduct and supervise audits and investigations